So if you're a videographer or cinematographer, you should actually consider lenses something like this. Now, these are vintage lenses that we're going to be discussing in this video. I've got about 6 of them that we're going to be talking about. Also with the Helios 44-2, we all love that lens. That is in this kit. Now, these are all by Iron Glass. It's not sponsored by Iron Glass. I can say whatever I want as well about these lenses, but they just happen to, give them a new lease on life, which is incredible when it comes to these lenses because they offer so much more value, specifically the price and what you can actually get out of these compared to standard stills lenses today. And that's what we're going to be discussing in this video to see the differences between the two and really what you can actually get out of these lenses. So let's get it. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. Like I said in that intro, these are sent by Iron Glass, not sponsored. Don't have to say anything about the company, but obviously the link will be in the description below if you do want to check these lenses out that are rehoused specifically by Iron Glass. Now, these are the Mark 1 version, so they are so much cheaper than the Mark 2. The Mark 2 is like $2,900 US or from $2,900 US. Each lens. This whole kit of like 6 lenses is about $3,500 US or something like that. It's crazy. I'll put the link in the description below so you can check them out because all they are just rehoused in terms of putting some focus rings on here and putting an aperture ring. And then obviously I do have a PL mount, which I always recommend because you can pretty much adapt these to almost any camera. PL mounts are incredibly versatile. And they did actually put a front filter thread on here, so it is more consistent throughout the range, so you don't actually have to use step-up rings with these lenses. And it does seem like the optics are cleaned up as well, which is incredible because you don't want a whole bunch of fungus and a whole bunch of scratches on your vintage lenses. So there's a lot of good things to say about these Iron Glass lenses, but we have to talk about the character first and what vintage lenses actually offer you in terms of comparing them to stills lenses. Now, like I said, it gives you so much more character, and we have to establish, what is character? What's the differences between having a lens that has character and no character? And generally, the thing that actually gives you character is imperfections. And when it comes to cinematography, filmmaking, kind of imperfections are almost perfect. They're perfect imperfections. It's really crazy. It's really strange, but it adds so much more dynamic to your footage. It turns that 2D image into a more 3D plane. It gives it more flavor. But once you shoot on these kind of lenses, you can really see the value of what you actually get out of these in terms of comparing these to a really sterile, clean stills lens. Now, you can really see the difference when it comes to the bokeh and obviously the sharpness out to the edges. You can see the bokeh tends to be a little bit more oval shaped as opposed to spherical, and the sharpness in the edges obviously is very soft when it comes to some of these vintage lenses. It will depend on vintage lens to vintage lens. So there are a few different situations where this could actually be beneficial to your filmmaking. So if it's a little bit soft out in the edges and you have a whole bunch of things in the same plane as your character, it's going to really draw your focus in on that character in the center because obviously the center is the sharpest and it's all blurry on the outside. So that can work in your favor. But then if you have 2 characters in the scene, this is where things could get a little bit complicated because if they are side by side and you do have a wide master, they could be slightly soft in the edges, or other characters in the scene could be slightly soft in the edges. But it really just does depend on your framing and composition, your storytelling, and how it's going to enhance the storytelling. So there could be pros, there could be cons, but majority of the time, they're pros in the end. And now when it comes to that Batman footage that you just saw, it wasn't actually done on a physical vintage lens. Essentially, it was done on the, I think it's the RE Prime DNA lenses, and they just have a particular style of characteristic inside, obviously the elements, and it just renders the bokeh very unique. And you don't actually physically have to have old vintage lenses to get a very similar look. There are some modern lenses that have a lot of character in them as well. And these, for a lot of cinematographers, are far more desirable than some of the clean lenses. And when it comes to the John Wick film, they actually use the Hawk V-Lite vintage lenses, and they look absolutely incredible. Give you a completely different vibe as well when it comes to that character. So if you actually do some research, you'll notice a lot of films are using vintage style lenses, or obviously anamorphic lenses, because we all know that anamorphic lenses with that squeeze factor really makes the bokeh look very unique, and obviously the flaring and stuff that's sort of added with anamorphic lenses. But it's just so much more common to see vintage style and anamorphic lenses as opposed to clean spherical lenses in a lot of films. It really depends on the storytelling and what kind of vibe and what kind of look you're going for, because you don't obviously need to, use vintage lenses all the time or anamorphic lenses all the time. There are certain situations where you probably need really clean spherical lenses, and it really does come down to personal preference. Now back to the iron glass lenses, and when it comes to the flaring, this is where you can see a lot of imperfections and heaps more flaring artifacts and unique flaring artifacts when it comes to the vintage lenses over clean stills lenses. And these kind of flaring artifacts are only really noticed when you have a strong light source hitting the actual lens itself. And if you don't actually want this, all you need is a matte box to block out the direct light that's actually hitting the front element. But a lot of cinematographers in specific scenes will actually lean into this and have more flaring artifacts, but some cinematographers may not like it. They just like the other qualities that come with vintage lenses. Now, when it comes to video lenses, testing charts are actually quite useful to see how well the lens performs, so you know how to actually utilize these lenses in your particular situation. Now, this is the Mia 20, and you can see this 20mm is pretty sharp in the center, but when it goes out to the edges, there's a lot of barrel distortion, and it is actually very soft out in the edges. And obviously, if you do stop down the aperture, this is when these lenses do start to get a bit sharper. Now, this one is the Mia 10A, which is a 28mm f3.5 wide open in the center. Same thing again. Nice and sharp and out to the corners. It is relatively soft and not too much distortion in this one. And this is the Mia 1B, which happens to be a 37mm f2.8, and you can see nice and sharp in the middle, and it does fall off actually quite quick out to the corners where it does soften up quite a lot. Now we head over to the Helios 44-2, which is a 58mm f2.0, nice and sharp in the center, does fall off when it comes to the focus out in the corners, and when it comes to distortion, not too much barrel distortion there. Now the Jupiter 9 happens to be an 85mm f2.0, and it actually is quite sharp in the center and out in the edges, but there is a little bit of chromatic aberration with this one, but not too much barrel distortion. And lastly, we have the Jupiter 37A, which is a 135mm f3.5 wide open, nice and sharp in the center, out to the corners. That's when it starts to get a little bit soft. Not too much barrel distortion, actually probably a little bit of pincushion distortion here. But overall, all these lenses perform really sharp in the center, and they do tend to get a little bit softer on the edges until you start stopping the aperture down. That's when they start to perform a little bit better when it comes to this, but you have to understand each individual lens's performance to how you're actually going to be using it in your actual film. There is a time and place. You're obviously not going to be using vintage lenses for all your shoots, because there are specific people who want perfectly sharp from center to edge, and these don't give you that. Majority of these lenses in this kit are pretty sharp in the center, but when it comes to the outsides, you have a ton of distortion, there's a bit of chromatic aberration, and the focus falls off dramatically in some of these. Like, they're really soft on the outside, which I love about these lenses. Now, obviously, these are manual focus lenses, and you're actually looking at the Mia 1B, which is a 37mm lens, and yeah, it's autofocusing, but I'm using the DJI LiDAR system, and it's obviously autofocusing perfectly fine once you calibrate it, but these manual lenses are quite difficult to use because you can see this is the Helios 44-2, and the focus ring is actually quite close to the actual mount itself, and the 37mm is actually far worse. It's much thinner when it comes to that focus thread, and it is closer to the actual mount itself, and they can be quite difficult if you are using your hands and just ripping and gripping. So you will actually need a follow focus motor like the Tilta Nucleus Nano, or you could just go a regular focus hand wheel is perfectly fine. But majority of these will be fine when it comes to just ripping and gripping, but I always suggest focus motors. You just get so much more control, but it really does just depend on your skill level and what you actually prefer anyway. Now look, there's also nothing stopping you from actually buying just a Helios 44-2 by itself and turning it into a bit of a cine modded rig yourself. Like, this is the M42 mount to PL adapter, and I've got a gear ring on here as well, but then you would have to have step up rings for this weird small 49mm front filter thread. You can still do the same. Essentially, it's the exact same optics. They've just done it for you, which obviously just makes it easier to use because of the front filter thread. You do have better gear rings on here and the PL mount as well. But if you can get these vintage lenses really cheap, you could get some really good value out of them. And like I said, incredible looking images. So this one right here that I'm holding is probably one of my favorites in the kit. And this is called the Mir 20. It's a 3.5 in terms of the aperture, so it's not incredibly bright, but the image you actually get out of this is so unique, and the character that this thing gives you, it's not incredibly sharp in terms of the whole image. In the center, it's fairly decently sharp, but obviously when you go out to the edges, it gets really soft, and now it comes down to the bokeh quality in a lot of these lenses. So now over to you. Let me know in the comments below, do you like vintage lenses? Do you like character? Do you like those imperfections in lenses when it comes to video work? I would really like to know your thoughts in the comment section below. So thanks for watching, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. That would be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Like I said, the link will be in the description below if you do want to check these ones out. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.